All right, time for another video. So thanks for joining. If you last left off with us, the Jeep, we had the body off the Jeep, and we were ready to start tackling what's attached to the frame, specifically the drivetrain. So fortunately, this weekend, my Uncle Bernie is going to come in and is going to help me remove the engine and drivetrain. He's done it a dozen times, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So by the end of this, we should have the engine and the transmission out, mounted to an engine stand, and ready to move on with the rest of the frame disassembly. No idea how long it's going to take, but we're going to figure it out. All right.
Oh, there's a lot of dinosaurs around here.
There's no dinosaurs in here. I don't know what you're talking
Oh
about.
my god!
Ah!
Get away!
All right, step one, removing the coolant, or more likely wearing the coolant would be a better description. Like, who designs this stuff? Like, just piss all over the axle, because that's going to be a good idea. Anyway, at least it had a drain on the bottom, which is better than the last Chevy I worked on. Okay, Uncle Bernie here, removing the coolant hoses up top here. I'm not sure why we had the vehicle jacked up to the roof, because that just makes it difficult, but when you have a lift, I guess you use it for no particular reason. And there's the radiator. It ended up being in pretty good shape, although I do have a new one coming. There's nothing really wrong with that one. Must have been replaced previously. And next, removing the transmission fluid. I wasn't sure how old it was, because I've only had this Jeep for about 6 months, but decided I better pull it out anyway. It ended up looking terrific, as you can tell here. Nonetheless, we're going to have some new transmission fluid in this thing eventually. Now removing the drive shafts. Uncle Bernie working on the rear one here. Really small kind of bolts. Got to be careful with these. Hang on to all the parts. And once you pull them out, something Bernie suggested was you wrap the U-joint in electrical tape, just so everything stays attached. So here he's doing that there. I will be replacing these U-joints and the seals, but for now we'll just store everything, so we'll have it for later. And we're doing the front drive shaft now. He's already got the bolts out, so just using the screwdriver to pull it apart, and then again going to wrap it with the electrical tape. I did skip a few other things. He removed the O2 sensor from the exhaust, and I think there were a few other things he was removing from the bottom of the engine, although I don't have it and don't recall anymore. When you're under there, there's a lot of stuff you can kind of tackle at once. Here is the starter. I'm going to pull that off. A couple bolts or so. There's the electrical cables as well as the physical mounts. And this one was a little bit more difficult, but managed to get it off. There we go. And next, this is on the bottom of the transmission skid plate. So don't take this off. I was actually thinking I'd just take this off, but the transmission actually sits on it and it has a number of bolts going through into it. So you're going to make sure that you leave that on until the transmission is removed. In this scenario, pulling out the other drive shaft, and now removing the electrical connections from the back of the alternator. I didn't have the right ratchets on hand for some strange reason, so that made this difficult. Now here, nothing really too much to note. These are the windshield washer pumps, but just notice how we're labeling every single wire. So I have a little $25 label maker, and we're labeling every single cable, every single wire, and ultimately every bag of parts that we pull off of this thing, so we'll know where to put it back. This is the ECU here. But these wires, they go everywhere, and they're going to be hard to get back into place unless you label them. Now Bernie's removing the brake lines, and looks like some more of the electrical cables here. So right now the brake booster is just sort of sitting in the air and being held up by the brake lines. So we wanted to get that off of there because eventually it's just a matter of time before you break them. And there it goes. These wires here are actually from the winch, so you probably won't have these in yours, but they were routed up through the firewall and they were just tangled up into absolutely everything. I think I'll probably find a better way of doing that when I put my new winch on. Now up on top here, the cabling on above the fuel rails, again labeling everything as we pull it out. You'll notice that that wiring harness is absolutely massive and hideous. And now underneath the radiator support, so there's a single body mount here, same as all the other body mounts that held the body on, just there's a single one that holds the front grille on along with the radiator. And then we were able to pull all that out. Next here, going to work on the Serpentine Belt. So this is the spring tensioner, and I'm not able to move it. The bolt is rusted into place here. So ultimately we just abort on trying to remove it the proper way and just unbolt the whole thing with the impact gun. Okay, and now we're moving the bracket and the belt and the power steering pump. And there it goes off to the side, and we just tie this onto the strut tower for the time being. Now, kind of jumping around here, back to the exhaust. These bolts were completely seized. Basically, anything on the rear sort of half of the Jeep is very rusted, just from I think the water and salt spray. In the end, the hacksaw wasn't enough. We had to bust out the angle grinder, which is going to become a theme going through the rest of this project here. You're going to need a lot of those cutting blades, so buy them in bulk. You'll notice there's a bracket here that attaches right down onto the transmission skid plate as well, so that's actually what's holding the exhaust in place here. In the end, I'm going to be getting a new skid plate, so we're not going to have to salvage the old one. And here, I don't actually know what this is. I think this is related to the clutch, obviously mounted to the transmission. We obviously had to use vice grips to get it off. Yeah, I can't remember precisely what this is here. Whatever it is, there it's gone. And back up front again, Bernie is now starting to pull out the fan. One of the things I noticed with the fan is it's not really balanced. I guess it is balanced, but when you look at it, the blades are not equally spaced, the 5 blades. I have no idea why this is, but I thought it was just my fan at first, but it's actually all of them. And so that's normal. So if you're wondering why your fan looks all wonky, that would be why. Bernie's now pulling out the alternator. I think I'm going to be able to reuse this. You can't replace everything, and it's actually a pretty easy fix later should it need to be replaced. And then next we're going to have to remove the brackets that held in the alternator as well. And now the lower bracket. Again, keep all the bolts and pieces together. I put them into nice big Ziploc bags and label them as I move through this. So that's usually what I'm doing while Bernie's working, is I'm labeling and storing stuff. Alright, now some more electronic modules just attached on here. I'm not exactly sure what this one is. And then next, jumping into the distributor. This also looks like it had been replaced on mine, even though I'm going to get a new one. Okay, and I'm not exactly sure what this is. Some form of a sensor that was attached to the electrical system here. So pull that off. Probably a oil pressure sensor. And next, that was the power steering bracket. So now this part was a little bit difficult, removing the intake and exhaust manifolds. So they're It's kind of hard to get at the bolts for this, and unfortunately this angle doesn't show it, but some bolts actually hold in both the intake and the exhaust. So you notice we got the extension here. So you kind of got to take them both out almost at the same time. So I'm kind of supporting the intake manifold as he's removing the bolts. There we go. One thing that I didn't show was the removal of the fuel lines. On this particular YJ, that's easy to do just with a little screwdriver, and it shoots some fuel out, so it makes a bit of a mess. But that's the water pump, and then above that is the thermostat housing, and there is the thermostat. Alright, so now it's time to start getting this thing out of there. I got a really heavy duty chain that I actually use for boat anchors. And look for some spots to fasten it to. So Bernie found one on the front of the block here. We kind of wanted to go right back to the transmission, but there was just nowhere to attach it to. So I ended up just kind of going right in through here into the bell housing. Not the greatest spot because it's not going to be lifting equal front to back, but that's what we decided to do. And now hooking up the engine crane. I do have a video on this crane review. I'm fairly pleased with it so far. You can take a look at that. And just lift it up enough here so that you can get the engine mount, the bolts removed. We had to use the furthest extension on this engine crane. As you can see on the top left there, it's only rated to 1/4 ton at this extension. It ended up being enough, but for a larger engine I'm not sure it would be, particularly with the transmission attached. So your mileage may vary with that. And I'm trying to remove the one on the other side, which is binding a little bit here. And it's still binding. And have to use a wedge just to kind of pull it out of here. There we go, John. Figuring it out. And there we go. We're detached. More coolant pouring out of this thing. So now the fun part, getting it up and out of the way. So here we start jacking it up a little bit more. And as Bernie jacks it up, I'm going to start coaxing it out of the chassis here. Apparently we're doing a lot of pondering and figuring. Alright, so now I'm in. So I'm just going to lift up on the back here and help to balance it. And more coolant pouring out. That's just great. No wonder my garage smells like coolant. Oil. Alright. Crane is doing its job, getting us up and clear. It's a little bit complicated because we're on the lift, so we're kind of about 6 inches up higher in the air. So the crane had to lift that much further, and when it does, number one, you can't get as close to the vehicle chassis because it runs into the lift, and number two, you don't get as much extension because you're kind of lifting up at an arc. Anyway, we thought we were going to be clever here and get it out, with some tools and some boards, but in the end, we just mauled it out of there. So it was reasonably heavy, but it wasn't unwieldy. I'd say this whole thing would be in the neighborhood of 600 to 700 pounds, depending on. And ultimately, the lift is rated to about 500 and change, I guess. But with me lifting some of it, it seemed to be fine. All right, guys, let's just get it out of here. And there we go. Okay. And now I am just removing the transmission from the engine. So these bolts are an assortment of sizes. They're different sizes, they're different legs. Some of them are your typical hex head, some of them are Torx. I swear, like, they just reached into the random parts bin and pulled out what they could when they built Jeeps. Because there's very little consistency from one part to the next. And again, all the more reason to keep your parts sorted and labeled. So now obviously I got to remove that last bolt, which is what I was using to lift, so I had to disconnect it there. It took me a while to figure out how to get these two things apart. Turns out that when they're together as long as they have been, they just want to stay that way. And so I just ended up having to keep prying at it and trying not to damage that that aluminum flange that kind of stuck between the two. Now, in order to mount it to the engine stand, I have to get the clutch and the flywheel off. So rather than working on the ground, I'm just going to jack it up here. There's obviously some risk in doing this, but by this point I was pretty satisfied with my engine crane. I ended up just being able to do this with the impact gun, didn't have to do it with hand tools. The nice thing about this is it's sealed, it's never seen any weather, so nothing's really all that rusted in here. It's just a little bit old. There we go. And then the flywheel's next. So these bolts are actually not completely at every 60 degrees. They're sort of spaced differently, so you can't put it back wrong. Careful because it is heavy. And this is that metal flange I was talking about. I had to make sure I didn't mash that up. Now, getting this on the engine stand was a bit of a brute doing it myself. I've seen some people, they actually stand the engine on end and then put the stand on that way. I thought I could do it like this, and eventually I was able to, but it wasn't easy getting it lined up. The thing is pretty heavy, obviously, and so there's a lot of screwing around to get it on there. In the end, I didn't get it mounted completely centered, and as a result, it's kind of off balance. And the engine kind of spun over on me one day and took a piece out of me. So I would recommend you try and get this as centered as you can. So mine is very much top heavy, as you can kind of tell here. But I did manage to get it attached and then eventually removed from the crane. All right. And there we go. Everything is now free. Drivetrain is removed. Okay, so here it is. Stock 4-liter from a 92 YJ. Not in bad shape. Probably going to be able to sell it actually once we take off the parts that we need. So thanks for Uncle Bernie to come in and helping. We got it out in about 5 or 6 hours, which was pretty quick, and then it took me about just as long to get it mounted to this thing, would get the right bolts. I'll actually link to a YouTube video here that'll show you where to get the bolt sizes for that. Thanks for that one. And yeah, so basically next step is going to be tackling getting the rest of the frame disassembled, getting the axles off, fuel system out, brakes, so on and so forth. That's one's going to be difficult, but then we're getting pretty close to the very bottom of the project. So I think that's it. So thanks for tuning in. Jurassic Jack, what do we say now?
What does